The lone officer smiled before delivering the insult. That was what Margaret Hale remembered most. Not the office, not the paperwork, not even the rejection. The smile. Polite, professional, dismissive. The kind people use when they've already decided how your story ends. Margaret sat across from Trevor Benson at the county bank while he reviewed her application. At least she assumed he was reviewing it. Most of the time, he seemed more interested in the acreage number printed near the top. 80 acres. Nothing more. Nothing less. Finally, Trevor set the file down, then folded his hands. Margaret. She already disliked the tone. What? Trevor smiled. The dangerous kind. The kind that wasn't actually friendly. I think you're looking at this the wrong way. Silence. Long silence. Then, how? Trevor tapped the application. The farm. Margaret frowned. What about it? Another smile. It's a nice project. The room became quiet. Very quiet. Margaret stared. Project. Trevor nodded. Yes. Long pause. Then, you mean business. Trevor hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. Margaret. Silence. What? 80 acres isn't really a commercial operation. The sentence hung in the air. Heavy. Annoying. Familiar. Because she'd been hearing versions of it for years. The Hale farm sat on 80 rolling acres outside town. Most local operations measured success differently. 500 acres. 800. 1,000. The county respected size. Margaret respected profit. Those weren't always the same thing. Her grandfather Samuel understood that better than anyone. One summer evening, when Margaret was 14, she followed him through a blackberry field behind the farmhouse. The rows stretched across a hillside, glowing beneath sunset light. Workers had already finished harvesting. Buckets sat everywhere. Samuel stopped beside a row heavy with fruit, then pointed toward a neighboring farm. 2,000 acres. Massive. Impressive. Everyone admired it. See that? Margaret nodded. The Wilson place. Yes. Long pause. Then, big farm. Samuel smiled. Very. Silence. Then, better than ours. Margaret expected an immediate answer. Instead, Samuel looked toward the blackberry rows, then toward the distant farm, then back. Depends. That answer annoyed her. Even at 14. Depends on what? Samuel picked a blackberry, then handed it to her. Profit. Years later, she finally understood. The Wilson operation produced huge volumes. Huge expenses too. Machinery, fuel, labor, debt, everything. Samuel's 80 acres produced specialty crops. Blackberries, peaches, figs, preserves, direct sales, different economics, different thinking. The lesson stayed. After Samuel passed away, Margaret inherited the farm, along with notebooks, hundreds of them, yield records, sales records, financial records, everything. One notebook fascinated her more than any other, because Samuel tracked profit per acre, obsessively. Not total revenue, not total production, profit per acre. The numbers shocked her. Some tiny sections of the farm outperformed entire neighboring operations. That changed how she viewed land forever. Years later, she expanded the specialty crop business. Slowly, carefully. Blackberries became preserves. Peaches became specialty products. Figs became premium goods. Nothing happened quickly. The county didn't notice. Mostly because the farm remained small. People see acreage. They rarely see margins. One autumn afternoon, Dale Harper stood beside a fence watching workers harvest berries. How's the hobby? Margaret looked over. The what? Dale grinned. The farm. Silence. Then, still making that joke? Absolutely. Long pause. Why? Because it annoys you. Margaret couldn't argue with that. The joke spread. Naturally. At the diner. At the co-op. At church. Everywhere. People called it Margaret's hobby farm. Nobody intended real harm. That somehow made it worse. Because they genuinely believed it. One evening, Emily Hale sat across from Margaret at the kitchen table. Financial statements covered every available surface. Production reports. Sales summaries. Customer orders. Everything. Emily looked around. You're doing it again. Margaret looked up. What? The spreadsheets. Silence. The spreadsheets. That means you're thinking. Long pause. Then, yes. Emily sighed. Dangerous. Very dangerous. What kind of thinking? Margaret pointed towards several sales reports. Expansion. Emily immediately looked nervous. Good expansion or expensive expansion? Margaret smiled slightly. Maybe both. The following spring brought opportunities. Restaurants wanted more preserves. Specialty retailers wanted larger orders. Tourist shops requested shipments. Demand kept growing. The problem wasn't customers. The problem was capacity. Margaret needed equipment. Processing equipment. Storage equipment. Packaging equipment. Everything cost money, which led directly to Trevor Benson's office. The loan application wasn't large, at least not by banking standards. Margaret thought the numbers made sense. Trevor disagreed. Repeatedly. Your projections are ambitious. Margaret nodded. Yes. Silence. Then, they rely on specialty products. Yes. Another pause. Direct sales. Yes. Trevor leaned back, clearly unconvinced. Finally, I think you're treating this farm like a business. Margaret stared. Because it is. Trevor smiled again. That smile. The one she would remember. I think it's more of a side project. The meeting ended shortly afterward. The loan never happened. Margaret drove home angry. Not because of the rejection. Because of the assumption behind it. The assumption that small meant insignificant. That evening she sat on the porch watching sunsets spread across the farm. 80 acres. Just 80. According to most people, that wasn't enough. Not enough land. Not enough scale. Not enough future. Samuel's notebooks sat beside her. One page remained open. A sentence underlined heavily years earlier. Small farms fail when they try to be large farms. She stared at it for a long time, then smiled. Because suddenly the answer felt obvious. The next morning she changed everything. Instead of expanding broadly, she specialized further. Premium preserves. Small batch products. Direct-to-consumer sales. Mail orders. Higher margins. Less volume. Better customers. The strategy looked strange from the outside, which meant the county immediately criticized it. Naturally, one summer afternoon Dale found her loading specialty gift boxes into a delivery van. He stared, then pointed. No. Margaret smiled. Morning. Dale pointed again. No. Silence. What? Gift baskets. Yes. From a farm. Yes. Dale shook his head. This is getting weird. Margaret laughed softly. Give it time. Because something was happening. Something nobody else noticed yet. Orders increased. Then increased again. Then increased again. Restaurants reordered constantly. Tourist stores expanded purchases. Mail-order customers started buying by the case. Revenue climbed every month. Steadily. Quietly. The county remained unaware. Trevor Benson remained unaware. Almost everyone remained unaware. Until one November morning when Margaret finally sat down with her accountant. And for the first time, somebody calculated what the previous 12 months had actually produced. The number made both of them stop talking. The accountant checked the number 3 times. Then reached for a different calculator. Then checked it again. Margaret watched quietly. Because she'd never seen him do that before. Most accountants enjoyed numbers. This one appeared suspicious of them. Finally he leaned back. Removed his glasses. Then looked across the desk. Silence. Long silence. Then, no. Margaret frowned. What? He pushed the paperwork forward. No. Silence. No what? No. Long pause. Then, you planning to explain? The accountant pointed at the final figure. $275,000. The room became quiet. Very quiet. Because for the first time, everything existed in one place. Every preserve sale. Every specialty order. Every gift basket. Every wholesale account. Every direct shipment. Everything. 12 months. One number. $275,000. Cash sales. Generated from 80 acres. Margaret stared at the paperwork. Then read it again. Then once more. Not because she doubted it. Because she wanted to enjoy it. The drive home felt different. The farm looked different too. Not larger. Not richer. Just clearer. Because suddenly the years made sense. The experiments. The specialty products. The strange decisions. The criticism. Everything. Samuel's notebook sat on the passenger seat. The familiar page remained bookmarked. Small farms fail when they try to be large farms. She smiled the entire drive home. The following months became the busiest in the farm's history. Holiday orders exploded. Corporate gift purchases arrived unexpectedly. Restaurants increased contracts. Specialty retailers expanded inventory. Everything accelerated. One afternoon, Emily walked into the processing building carrying new order sheets. Then stopped, stared at the stacks, then laughed. What? Emily pointed toward the paperwork. We need another wall. Silence. Then, what? Orders. She dropped the stack onto a table. The pile looked ridiculous. Margaret stared, then smiled. That's a good problem. The county still didn't understand. At least not yet. People noticed activity. Delivery vans. Packaging shipments. New equipment. Employees. But most assumed the business remained small. Because the farm remained small. 80 acres. The number blinded them. People often confuse size with success. The distinction mattered. One January morning, Dale Harper walked into the diner, carrying coffee. He pointed toward Margaret through the window. There she is. Rick looked up. The hobby farmer? Dale nodded. The hobby farmer. Laughter spread around the table. Not cruel laughter. Just familiar. Comfortable. The kind people use when they've repeated the same joke for years. Margaret simply smiled. Because for the first time, the joke felt expensive. Spring arrived. Then summer. Then harvest. The operation expanded again. Additional products launched. New retail partnerships appeared. Everything seemed to gain momentum. One afternoon, a regional business magazine published a feature story. The article focused on specialty agriculture, high-value farming, direct marketing, innovative rural businesses. Margaret appeared on the cover, holding a jar of blackberry preserves. The headline attracted attention immediately, especially one detail: revenue. The article mentioned annual sales. People reread the paragraph repeatedly, then checked again, then showed somebody else. The number spread across the county faster than weather news. By evening, the diner looked different. Nobody laughed. Nobody joked. Instead, people stared at copies of the magazine. Dale folded his arms. No. Rick looked up. What? Dale pointed at the article. No. Silence. What? 275,000. Long pause. Then, no. The room fell quiet. Because suddenly the hobby didn't feel much like a hobby. Several days later, Trevor Benson walked into the market. The same market where Margaret sold preserves every weekend. The same market he'd passed dozens of times. The same market he'd barely noticed. Until now. Margaret stood behind her display, arranging jars. Exactly as always. Nothing had changed. Except Trevor. He approached slowly. Awkwardly. The way people walk when they wish they could restart a conversation from a year earlier. Margaret looked up. Morning. Trevor smiled. The smile looked different now. Less confident. Morning. Silence. Long silence. Finally. I read the article. Margaret nodded. Yes. Another pause. Then. Congratulations. She smiled slightly. Thank you. Trevor looked around the display. Then toward the delivery van. Then back. You were right. The sentence seemed difficult for him. Very difficult. Margaret waited. Eventually he continued. I thought you were building a side project. Silence. Then. I know. Trevor laughed softly. Not because anything felt funny. Because embarrassment needed somewhere to go. Apparently I missed something. Margaret looked toward the farm in the distance. Then back. No. Long pause. What? You missed a lot of small things. The answer stayed with him. Because it was true. The preserves looked small. The orders looked small. The market stand looked small. The farm looked small. Each piece individually appeared insignificant. Together they created something entirely different. The following autumn brought another successful season. Then another. The operation continued growing. Not through acreage. Through value. To customers. Through specialization. Exactly as Samuel predicted. One evening Emily sat beside Margaret on the porch overlooking the farm. The setting sun painted the orchards gold. Delivery vans sat parked near the processing building. Employees had gone home. Everything felt peaceful. Emily looked across the 80 acres. You know what's funny? Margaret smiled. What? They still call it the little farm. Silence. Then. Good. Emily laughed. Good. Margaret nodded. Yes. Long pause. Why? She looked across the land. Then toward the distant hills. Then back. Because they keep looking at acreage. The answer lingered. Because that had always been the lesson. For years people looked at Margaret Hale's 80 acres and saw limitations. Too small. Too narrow. Too insignificant. The loan officer saw a side project. The county saw a hobby. The farm saw something else. Opportunity.